Emily Parker stood quietly at the kitchen window of their two-story home in Bend, Oregon, watching the golden leaves fall in slow spirals across their backyard. The soft hum of the dishwasher was the only sound in the room. It was her husband. Daniel's birthday, and yet the air between them felt colder than the October breeze. 10 years of marriage had changed them both. Once, birthdays meant surprise picnics, late-night dancing in the living room, and whispered wishes under the covers. But this morning, Emily woke up alone on her side of the bed, and Daniel was already gone for work, leaving nothing but a note. Scribbled on the counter that read, "Back by 7." No smiley face. No "I love you," just black ink on white paper. That was the tone of their marriage, now functional, quiet, distant. She still loved him, but that love had started to feel like a one-way road full of memories she wasn't sure he held on to. Anymore, they lived together like roommates now, passing each other between meetings, errands, and evening news. She couldn't even remember the last time he kissed her without a clock ticking in the background. She had bought him a gift anyway. A vintage watch with a leather strap, one he'd admired almost a year ago when they were walking downtown holding hands like young lovers. Back then, things were still warm between them. Touches lasted longer, smiles came easier, and she could still feel wanted. Wrapping the gift, she took her time with the ribbon, choosing a deep forest green, the color of his eyes when the light hit just right. But beneath the wrapping paper and care was fear that it wouldn't matter, that he wouldn't even notice the detail. Emily wasn't just giving him a watch. She was giving him a piece of herself. A quiet plea that said, "Remember us. Remember me." That evening, he walked in with the usual tired face, hair a little windblown, coat draped over one arm. He kissed her cheek out of habit, not passion. "Happy birthday," she said, offering the box with a nervous smile. He smiled back, polite, grateful but distant. "Thanks, Em," he said, opening it slowly. "Wow, this is really nice." He admired the watch, held it for a moment, then put it back into the box like he didn't know what else to say. And just when she thought the evening would drift into another quiet dinner and another lonely night, Daniel surprised her. "I actually have something for you," he said softly, reaching into his coat pocket. She looked up, confused. "For me?" she asked. "But it's your birthday." He nodded and handed her a plain white envelope. No name, no bow, just a simple gesture that felt oddly heavy. Emily opened it slowly and gasped. Inside were 2 plane tickets to Prince Edward Island. Her heart skipped. That was where they honeymooned 10 years ago. The red sand beaches, the little cliffside cottage, the ocean air in her hair and his arms around her waist. It was the last place she remembered feeling completely loved. Completely. Seen, she looked up at him, tears starting to sting her eyes. "You remembered?" she whispered. Daniel took her hand, warm, familiar, but hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice almost cracking, "about who we were and what we lost. I want us back, Em. I miss you. I miss us." For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw the man she fell in love with, not the husband who forgot to kiss her goodnight, but the dreamer who once danced with her in the rain. And just like that, she realized, maybe their story wasn't over. Maybe this was the first page of something new. Emily sat at the edge of the kitchen chair, holding the envelope like it was made of glass. Everything about the moment felt strangely fragile. Daniel's eyes watching her closely, the quiet hum of the fridge, the smell of his cologne still lingering in the air. She hadn't expected this, not on his birthday. Not after months of drifting through their marriage, like 2 people trying not to say the wrong thing. The envelope had no writing on it, no bow, no card, just simple white paper that somehow felt more intimate than any diamond ring or dozen roses ever could. With slightly trembling hands, she pulled out what was inside. 2 plane tickets, tapped. behind a folded note in Daniel's neat handwriting. She scanned the destination and her breath caught Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. It took a second for her to process. That place wasn't just a vacation spot. It was where they had honeymooned 10 years ago when their love was loud and young and full of silly dreams. Where they had stayed in a tiny cottage by the cliffs, cooked breakfast in their pajamas, kissed by candlelight, and promised each other forever with the kind of hope only newlyweds carry. That place wasn't just a memory, it was the beginning. Of them, she looked up slowly, heart thudding. "Why now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Daniel looked at her like a man who had finally stopped running from something. "Because I don't want to keep living next to you and forgetting what it feels like to actually be with you." His voice was raw, lower than usual, full of something deeper regret. "Maybe longing. We've been going through the motions, Em. I see it in your eyes. I feel it in the silence between us. And I'm scared. Scared that if we don't do something now, we'll wake up one day and realize it's gone. That we're gone." Emily blinked, trying to hold back the sudden sting of emotion. The man sitting across from her wasn't the distracted husband she'd gotten used to. This was the Daniel who once carried her into the ocean at midnight, laughing like they had nothing in the world to lose. This was the Daniel who used to write her notes and tuck them into her suitcase when she traveled for work. Somewhere in the years of bills, schedules, and worn-out dinners, she'd forgotten that he still had this depth in him, that he could still see her dash. She opened the folded note, and in Daniel's handwriting were only 5 words. "Let's find us again, Em." It wasn't poetry, but it hit her harder than any grand speech. It was honest, simple, a plea, not a performance. Her fingers gripped the edge of the envelope tighter as something warm and aching bloomed in her chest. She'd been silently begging for something like this for months, some sign that he still felt the emptiness too. And now here it was, not in a fight, not in a breakdown, but in a quiet invitation to return to a place where love had once wrapped itself around them like soft sheets. Emily stood slowly, walked toward him, and rested her hand against his cheek. "You really want this?" she asked, searching his eyes. "Not just for the memory, but for now, for us?" Daniel leaned into her touch and nodded. "More than anything." And in that moment, something shifted between them. The distance, the silence, the cold comfort, they cracked just enough for the light to come in. Maybe this trip wouldn't fix everything, but maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it just had to remind them that their love wasn't lost, just waiting to be remembered. The plane touched down in Prince Edward Island just after sunset, and as Emily stepped off into the cool air, she felt something stir in her chest, like a forgotten feeling slowly waking up. The island looked exactly as she remembered. Peaceful, timeless, wrapped in the soft colors of nature. It had been 10 years, but the red clay cliffs, the soft rush of waves, and the scent of salt and pine made it feel like no time had passed at all. Daniel reached for her hand, and for a moment, it felt like they were simply that young couple again, just married, wide-eyed, and full of hope. They checked into the same little seaside cottage they had stayed in all those years ago. It was still there, untouched by time, with the same wooden beams, white linen curtains, and the small fireplace they used to curl up beside. But something was different now. The silence wasn't awkward like it had been at home. It was comfortable, even tender. The quiet space between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like permission to breathe. For the first time in months, they weren't talking about bills or work or things that didn't matter. They were just there, 2 people trying to find their way back to something sacred. Each day on the island added a small thread to the frayed fabric of their love. They walked along the cliffs in the mornings, drank coffee wrapped in blankets, and cooked together in the tiny kitchen, laughing when they burned the toast or spilled wine on the counter. Daniel started touching her again, not out of routine, but because he wanted to. A hand on her lower back, a brush of fingers against her cheek, and she responded not with hesitation but with softness. She had missed this version of him, the one who looked at her like she was still beautiful, still his. And somewhere between the shared laughter and long walks, Emily began to remember how much she had missed herself too. The woman she used to be when she felt loved, when she felt seen. But it was on the third night, when the rain came, that something deeper finally broke open between them. A storm rolled in quickly, fierce and full of wind, shaking the windows and filling the air with that electric stillness before thunder. Emily woke up around 2 a.m. to find Daniel gone from bed. She panicked for a second until she saw the soft glow of light from the porch. She stepped out quietly and found him standing there shirtless, barefoot, staring at the ocean like it held every answer he'd ever needed. Rain fell against his skin, but he didn't move. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He turned to her, his eyes raw, his voice low. "I keep thinking about all the ways I let you slip away, and how I didn't know how to stop it." She stood beside him, letting the rain kiss her shoulders. He looked at her, not just looked, but saw her. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you didn't feel like mine anymore." Her heart clenched at the words. She'd felt that too, that slow fading, that emptiness. "I did feel far," she whispered, "but I didn't want to. I just didn't know how to reach you anymore." And then he reached for her, not with his hands, but with his heart. He pulled her into him, holding her tight against the cold night, the storm wrapping around them like a secret. Their kiss wasn't rushed, wasn't perfect, but it was real. It tasted like rain and sorrow and hope. And in that moment, a sky that cracked with thunder, they weren't just fixing their marriage. They were falling in love all over again. Not with the people they used to be, but with who they were now, flawed, grown, still choosing each other. Asterisk the morning after the storm. The world felt quiet, like something sacred had passed through and left only calm behind. The ocean outside. Their cottage stretched wide and still, reflecting the soft pinks and golds of a new day. Emily woke slowly, the smell of coffee drifting into the room, and for the first time in what felt like years, she felt rested not just in body, but in her heart. The bed beside her was empty, but not in a lonely way. She heard the familiar sound of Daniel moving around in the kitchen, humming to himself the same tune he used to hum when they were newlyweds. She smiled, pulling a sweater over her shoulders, and padding barefoot into the small living room. There he was, standing in the warm morning light, holding 2 mugs and waiting for her. He handed one to her with a look that held more love than words could carry. "You always wake up beautiful," he said softly, and it wasn't flattery. It was the truth in his eyes that made her chest ache. They spent the day without a planned jest, being together. They returned to all the places they had loved once, the rocky shoreline where they had skipped stones and talked about their dreams, the tiny local bookstore where Daniel had once bought her a worn-out poetry book with a note tucked inside. They laughed more that day than they had in years. But as the sun began to fall behind the cliffs, Daniel grew quiet again. Not in a distant way, but like he was waiting for the right moment to speak. After dinner, he led her outside where a fire crackled in a small pit he had made by the beach. A blanket was spread out, 2 glasses of wine waiting. The waves rolled in slowly, the wind soft and salty. Emily sat down, watching the flames. When Daniel pulled something small from his coat pocket, a second envelope, just like before. Her heart jumped. "Another surprise?" she asked, half laughing, but also nervous. He nodded, but didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat beside her, his shoulder touching hers, and handed it to her gently. "This one's different," he said. "It's not a trip. It's not jewelry, it's something I should have given you a long time ago. Inside the envelope was a folded letter, not typed, not rushed, but written by hand, every line in Daniel's neat, careful script. As she read, the world around her fell away. He wrote about the ways he had failed her, the times he let work, stress, and fear push her away. He wrote about how deeply he still loved her, how he never stopped seeing her even when he didn't know how to show it. He apologized not for the small things, but for the big, silent hurts they had both lived with. He told her how watching her stay, despite everything, made him want to be better. Not for the sake of saving a marriage, but because she deserved more. The letter ended with one simple sentence that broke her heart open in the most tender way. I loved you then, I love you now. And I promise I'll never stop choosing you, even when life gets loud. Emily didn't realize she was crying until he reached out and gently brushed the tears from her cheeks. No gift had ever touched her like this. It wasn't a thing she could wear or display, it was the gift of being seen, heard, and loved again completely. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest, listening to the sound of his heart. They stayed there until the stars came. Out, wrapped in each other, wrapped in something deeper than romance, something real. That night, under the open sky, Emily understood. The most unexpected gift wasn't the trip or the letter. It was this man choosing to love her again with the kind of love that stays even after the fire fades.